Hello and welcome to Penmanship, a podcast about Australian writing culture. I'm your host, Andrew McMillen, and my guest in episode 36 is freelance writer, performer and author John Clarke. John died suddenly on Sunday, 9th of April 2017, aged 68. I had spoken to him a few days beforehand and we had made plans to record a conversation for this podcast while I was visiting Melbourne that weekend. Since that cannot happen, I am bringing you a special episode based on a day that I spent with John in November 2014 when I was reporting a story for the Weekend Australian Review about the creative process behind Clarke Dawe, the weekly political satire program that John wrote and performed alongside longtime collaborator Bryan Dawe. As I wrote in my article, Clarke Dawe was more often than not among the week's sharpest commentary on up-to-the-minute matters relating to Australian politics and public life. Together, the two performers sought to make us laugh while also making us think. This was a dream assignment for me, as it involved spending a day in John's company as he wrote a couple of scripts, met with Bryan to film the program at an ABC television studio, and supervised the final edits of a 2.5-minute program that would be broadcast around Australia the following evening. In between these tasks, there was plenty of time for conversation. At no point did John seem rushed, and he had a kind word and a wry joke for everyone he crossed paths with. This episode consists of excerpts from some of the writing-related discussions he and I had that day, as well as a few amusing asides. I'd also encourage you to read my article for the Weekend Australian Review, which is called In the Line of Political Satire, and which you can find linked in the show notes. I put a lot of effort into the writing and rhythm of this piece, because I knew John would read it, and that man rarely wasted a word. Our first conversation that day took place in a Fitzroy cafe on Wednesday, 12th November 2014. My recording device was a small digital recorder placed on the table between us or held in my hand as I wrote in my notebook while on the move. The audio wasn't captured with this podcast in mind as penmanship did not exist at the time. The recording at this first location has the most ambient noise, so you'll hear a bit of the coffee machine in action, as well as some other voices in the background. Please bear with me as the audio quality does improve throughout this episode as we move to quieter locations. There is about 20 minutes of audio in this cafe section, cut into 4 segments. Some of the cuts are quite abrupt, but I'll briefly introduce each section to give some context throughout the episode. This first excerpt sees John discussing the weekly format of Clarke Dawe, and how he liked to sometimes break it up by latching on to current events. Introducing John Clarke, freelance writer, performer, and author.
One of the things about doing that once a week is that if you're given the opportunity to shift the form slightly, you do, because the opportunities aren't always there to do that. So if we can get some like a different metaphor or another way of dealing with it or something like that, which happens whenever there's a big other event like the Olympics or something, and you can infuse it with the same concerns that the audience and us are looking at, but you're not condemned to exactly the same model each week. So now and again we just jump out of that model.
So this morning, for example, do you have any inkling on what you might be doing? Do you have a couple of thoughts rattling around? Do you take notes throughout the week leading up to this point?
No, I suppose I do subconsciously, but I don't have a piece of paper.
The next excerpt discusses John's views on the audience for Clarke Dawe, as well as how he had developed his instincts as a writer by attempting to amuse himself first.
Hey, do you think about audience at all? What will reach the widest?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, I'm in the audience for our stuff. So I'd like...
What do you mean by that? I'm in the audience.
I mean, if you're thinking about if I'm thinking about what might work, I'm not thinking about what might amuse you, I'm thinking about what might amuse me. I'm thinking about pitching it so that I would get it. Because what else am I going to base my... a lot of this is instinctive, so you need to understand the instinct and to keep in touch with it. I mean, if you start trying to please someone who isn't you, and you do something that doesn't work, you can go, oh, well, that doesn't matter, that's just what I do for a living. And or if you write a piece and it's about somebody you're not really interested in, and none of it matters, and you're just taking a fee. And if somebody says, "I saw that, and why did you write that?" then you can't say, "Oh, didn't you like that?"
You can dismiss it.
Yeah, I know what you mean. That wasn't very, Whereas if I'm going to get me better at doing what I do, I need to make my own mistakes and get things wrong on the basis of a process I understand, so that if that winglet is tightening over there, I can, otherwise I don't know. If you wanted to just please a crowd, you wouldn't be doing it. You'd be playing stadiums and,
Yeah. Has your thinking on this remained the same since the current affair days, for example?
Yeah, my thinking on this has been the same since I was a kid.
Right.
Well, when you're a kid, yeah. I mean, most people are in sort of... A lot of people who are in whatever it is that we might describe this business as being, and I don't have a description for it.
Yep.
Most of them start as performers. You start as a performer when you're a kid, and you don't much care what you're doing as long as it's funny. And if someone says it'll be really funny if you go and stand on that tram, you'll go out there and climb up on the tram and stand on the tram, and your mates will piss themselves laughing. That's the go. After a while you realise that if you think of an idea, and if you think that's actually a bit childish, but it works. There's a difference between thinking, looking at the things that really do genuinely amuse you and say, how do the people who do that? Because that's what really interests me. And then after a while, working out what it is that appeals to you about that, and a little bit about how to do it. And if that appeals to you, then you should be able to, if that particular thing appeals to you, then you should be able to work out how to do it in such a way that it would appeal to you if you did it. You need to be you. You don't need to be copying someone else. Everybody copies somebody at the beginning, obviously, typing out under S or being influenced by somebody and going, that's really good, I'd like to do that. So you drift over towards that activity, but you need to work out your own particular way of doing it. There aren't really very many touchstones. And the audience part of me is very much a key instinct. If I don't think, I think that is a bit... how else are you going to assess what you're doing?
This excerpt discusses the rhythm of the dialogue that powered Clarke and Dawe, as well as how John attempted to draw viewers in by writing marginal iterations on a familiar format.
I would think that the same things apply in normal conversation as apply in what we do.
Sure.
There's very similar mechanisms. And we picked a form that's designed to contain all of that. And there are lots of times in your life when you're engaged in it's dialogue. You can add to the dialogue by having a phone ring or talking to someone who's off camera or something. So you can get a little one-act play going if you want. But the central model is dialogue. And dialogue is not only a pretty common thing in life, it's a very handy device in television because we see it so much. So in the first line or two, you need to know where you are. Who are we talking to? Who is this person? What's the subject matter? Or whatever it is.
Which is why probably, if not all of your scripts, 99% begin with Tony Abbott, thanks for joining us, or Joe Hockey, thanks for joining us.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
Establishing that, those first few lines establish.
That's right.
No matter if you've seen your program 1,000 times or for the first time, it's...
Yes.
Yeah.
Or the beginning is to do with the fact that we don't quite know who we're like. You're an economist. Well, I'm
economic consultant.
Yeah, that's sort of which is designed to question whether or not we know what is meant by you're an economist, because there are millions of different sorts of economists, and there are economists representing different theories of economics. There are economists representing different sort of subsections of how this economy works. There are economists who deal with markets. There are economists who deal with macro rather than micro. There are, what are we talking about? Because very often we're a bit inclined to think, that's like we should listen. For example, whenever the stock market falls over, we always hear an awful lot of economists being interviewed, and most of them are apologists for the problem. Most of them are people saying, well, this is you have these occasional corrections, which is a bit like a car manufacturer saying, I'm sorry that the steering wheel fell off and you went into the ditch. That happens from time to time.
Yes.
Bullshit. What are you doing selling this thing?
Yeah.
But so we need to know, all of these. Our arguments need to at least look as if they hold some water. I wouldn't make any bolder claims other than that, because but they should at least question some assumption that we've made and we need to look at, or something. So something, yes, and you have to do that in a shorthand way, and you very often have to do it at the front. But quite a lot of it is to do just with the fact that in our talk, with people you work with, or people you live with, or people you know, there are things that make it enjoyable. One of them is rhythm. For example, sometimes we'll shoot the same interview twice, and that one's much funnier than that one. The words are the same. It's the rhythm. So there's that, and that happens. Everybody gets familiar with that. So we're trying to catch that sometimes.
Right.
And so it's a bit of a will-o'-the-wisp. It's not exactly jokes.
No, it's
there are jokes.
Subtle.
Well, that's very kind of you, but we'll put a joke in there if we know one. Old army gags and anything that amuses us. So I wouldn't want to be too pompous about the lofty standard of what we're doing, because we put. But one of the things we find funny, I suppose, is what I'm saying very often, is just the beat, the music, the rhythm.
For sure.
Because like a cartoon in the newspaper, what we're doing in that particular job, the Clarke Dawe job, is it's a sort of box into which we put a thing which ought to be recognisably us. I don't know quite how people would define the characteristics, but it needs to be sufficiently idiosyncratic that, like a cartoonist, just opening the page, oh, there's a Loonig, or there's I wouldn't compare myself with Michael, but there's a Pryor, or whatever, there's a Petty, there's a whatever it is. It's kind of like the verbal equivalent of handwriting or something. And if you don't somehow do that, then I think people don't need to listen to you quite so carefully. We're trying to sort of draw people in a bit.
This next excerpt is the last one in the cafe and the longest recording from that location. Here, John discusses the origins of the Q&A format of Clarke Dawe, which started as a newspaper column and then became a radio segment before it became a television program. Through it all, John made no attempt to impersonate the appearance or voice of politicians and public figures, and here we discuss why he chose that approach.
And it's pretty good, the smaller we get, the more it's pretty good. I rather like that aspect of it, because I like our audience. Our audience is a very good audience. And I like that about them, that they're prepared to just go.
Yeah, give me 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Give me 2 minutes a week to listen to these guys.
Yeah, because you can do stuff that's so small.
Yeah.
And you can have, I don't know, a lot of it I think is to do with the kind of reading of the way we behave. And the business of pretending to be someone else is an interesting one. Because I'm pretending to be someone else, but I'm not pretending to be them. That's an interesting one. And perhaps in saying you are a member of Parliament, or you are the head of this corporation, or you are the captain of the cricket team, or the Prime Minister, or whatever it is. If that's not a realistic possibility, then what price democracy? That is the democratic idea that each of us has the capability to do that thing. So part of the idea of a democracy is that those people are us.
Yeah.
So it's not absolute nonsense. It's a bit surreal, but at a deep level it ain't too far from at least the comforting notion that is the case.
That idea of not dressing up, not pretending while pretending, did that come from the fact that the format started on radio, therefore it didn't matter what the hell you were wearing?
No, I think it started from the fact that when I first started the idea, I wrote it as a newspaper column. And what I was trying to do was to adopt the form. First one I wrote, I think, first one that was published in the newspaper was actually an interview with Joe Bjelke-Petersen, a lapsed New Zealander who was running the state you come from.
Yep.
With a huge gerrymander and a few design problems which emerged later.
Yes.
But
he was never charged though. Never charged them.
But what I was trying to do in that interview, and it was really just because it was when I had the column, I was trying to address some sort of writing.
So was it the interview format, question answer?
Yeah.
Right.
I did other things in the column, but I got increasingly interested in this interview idea because in that case, for example, there's an interview that he was being completely silly. He said he was going to have a run at Canberra, and he then wasn't even in the country. He said things that were manifestly ridiculous all the time.
Yeah.
So I did the interview with, I thought, well, the problem with this is that very often if you see an interview with him, he's treated seriously. So what would it be like if we treated him in a different way? So I did with him the standard interview that people do with a comic. So the first question was, thank you for the time. When did you first discover you could make people laugh? Is it a schoolyard thing? Is it sort of defensive, basically? Yes. And he did that standard interview with the comedian, because what I was trying to do was to suggest that the only explanation for this guy's ludicrous behaviour is that he's trying to be funny, he's trying to make you laugh, because nothing he does can be taken seriously. None of his arguments make sense. There's no reasoning behind anything he does other than a very uncharitable view of what he's doing, which by inference is what he's doing. So that was what I was attempting to do, and I thought that's kind of an interesting idea. So what was happening was that there were two things happening at the same time, which I liked. And so when I did them, and I did a few on radio, because ABC Radio had asked me to go back and do some stuff on radio, and I'd done a lot of radio at the ABC in the 70s and stuff, but I wanted to do it a slightly different way. I didn't want to do monologues. So I said to the producer who approached me, who was a radio producer at the ABC, I said, this is what I'd like to do here. And he said, oh, that's a good idea, let's have a crack at that. And I said to him, would you mind reading the questions and we'll see if this idea works. And he read the questions, and he was very good at reading the questions. And so that's Bryan. So we did a few on radio to sort of tease out the idea and work out whether the fun was in how the fun could be in the writing and in the performance, you know. So it's not just one, it's not just either of those, it's both. And the absurdity of saying you are somebody and making no attempt to be them is just a nice thing to do. I thought that was a funny idea. So when we went to television, when Channel 9 wanted us to do some television, and I proposed that instead of doing monologues there, I take this idea, and they were very supportive of that idea, and it worked. And on television, it's an even sillier idea. And of course, at this time in the history of the relationship between politics and media, prime ministers and politicians, would-be prime ministers, people who are on the go, had worked out that rather than avoiding the media and saying, I'm far too important running the country to talk to you people, you could not afford to not talk to them, because this was the engine room of how you promulgated messages, how you presented yourself, how you could get a few, I don't know what they're called, but sort of key sort of mantras, and say them there, say them there, say them there, say them here, say them
surround sound effects.
Out it goes, surround sound. Yeah, you could do that, and the prime ministers of that period in Australia were people who were extremely good at it. Bob Hawke was brilliant at it, for example. So this was beginning to happen, and one of the consequences of that is that the people who were doing it were doing the thing that worked in the media. So if you were doing so, if you were the Prime Minister and it worked whenever you had a beer, then you had a beer. So there was beginning to be a quite performative element about what they were doing in their public manifestation. Therefore, it's nice counterbalance if we remove anything performative, including even the appearance and sound of the person. And we not only don't do impressions, we are almost monotonous. Exactly. So it's up to you.
The next few excerpts were recorded in John's office in Fitzroy, which was a short walk from the cafe. This office consisted of 2 rooms, a large one surrounded by floor-to-ceiling shelves that included personal archives and storage, as well as DVDs, CDs and books that were sold through his website, mrjohnclarke.com. The second, smaller room featured a desk, a chair, a laptop computer and a phone. You can visit penmanshippodcast.com for a photo of John at the desk that I took on the day. This second room is where John wrote 2 Clarke Dawe scripts from scratch in a couple of hours, occasionally interrupted by phone calls that he placed to reporter friends so that he might better understand something that was in the news at the time.
It's funny, we did when the European economies collapsed, we did a thing that got very popular about I was sitting here thinking that an amusing aspect of this terrible shambles in the European economies was that they each owed billions, but they owed them to each other. And that sooner or later there was going to have to be someone who had some money there was a carousel of mutual indebtedness. And I thought, that's a funny idea if I can get it right. So I looked around on the internet and I found all sorts of stuff about this, and I sort of began to absorb bits and pieces. And then I found in the New York Times a graph which perfectly represented with arrows, even I could understand this, with arrows from country to country, what each country owed to the other country. So the figures in that piece were all taken from the graph in the New York Times, which was completely accurate, because I then went and checked the indebtedness with the countries, and this was completely correct. So I thought, that's what I need. I need to somehow represent that in here, in words, not pictures. So I did that, and about 3 or 4 days later, we were in the New York Times, because the New York Times economics editor had said, if you want to see this represented, if you want to see the problem in the European economies perfectly represented in comic form, go here. And there was a link to the YouTube thing that we'd done. And he said, these guys have somehow found this information. And I emailed him and I said, thank you very much for that. As a matter of fact, I got it out of your newspaper. He said, did we have that? I said, yeah, on this date, on this page. And he went, shit, so we did. So what you've done. So people were looking around at the time, and I thought that what they'd done was just a perfect, at-a-glance exposition of what...
Yeah.
But then he was thinking he'd forgotten that he was the chicken, we were the egg. You know? he was thinking, oh, I'll get some information from these guys. No, son, we got it from you.
This next section is a short snippet recorded just before we walked across the road for lunch. Toasted sandwiches and coffee.
What do you write in? Which program?
Anything. If I'm... I think that computer uses mainly Word. I think in this computer I use something else that's in the Mac system.
You don't have like a format that you just pull up each week and plug it into that?
Well, I just open it up and it's a typewriter.
Yes, it is.
It has no other interest. I mean, I don't have other devices that plug into it. I don't have an integrated layer.
This next excerpt was recorded after John had finished writing the 2 scripts and before he headed to the ABC studio at South Bank to film. Here, John reflects on narratives and storytelling, as well as an unrelated snippet about the glasses he was wearing while writing.
So, you finished 2 scripts?
Yes, I'm just going to reread them in a minute. And I've been talking to you and thinking about the oil spill, so I have a fresh eye. I've got a friend who was at school with me who did various things. He used to be a lawyer, probably still is. And he's done a few things in his life, and he's an interesting and very smart fellow. And the last time I saw him, he said, it answered the question, what are you up to lately? He said, I'm a narrative therapist. And I said, what's that? And he said, well, it's something to do with some strand of psychology and therapeutical psychology, or whatever it is, from Europe, Eastern Europe perhaps. Anyway, he says, in a nutshell, what I do is that people come to me with some sort of psychological problem which is affecting their life sufficient for them to get pissed off and worried or forced with a cattle prod by people they know to come and do something about it, and they come and see me, and I get them to tell me the story of their life, and I help them edit it. I said, that's a very interesting idea, isn't it? And he explained a little bit about the theory, and I suggested that in a way we do that. It's one of the uses of talk, is that we a kind of collaborating on an agreed, negotiated and mutually approved version of what we're saying is happening or did happen. It might not have happened. I mean, people have described to me things they saw me do on stage or something when I was young. And their memory of it is very good. Much better than what I did.
Yeah.
Much, much better. And it's a kindness that they remember them like that. It reflects their good nature, really, rather than anything I particularly did. But I'm the name they've given to that thing. That is what we sometimes do, it seems to me. And I thought that's a really interesting thing. And to allow someone to help you edit, I suppose, and you do allow some people to help you edit, and you don't allow other people who haven't got the right to help you edit, like, if your parents split up, then there are some people who you realise you can allow them to talk about that with you, and there are other people you won't allow to talk about that with you. I don't even know quite what the distinction is. It might not even be a consistent distinction. But there are ways in which we know what other people are allowed and what we are allowed.
Yeah.
Those things are sometimes pretty interesting. So the idea of formalising that into a person who helps you edit, and you just go blather, 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 then this, then that, then that, then that, and somebody says, well, just hang on there. Are you sure that happened? Like, maybe that, maybe you shouldn't have felt so guilty about it. Maybe you didn't feel so guilty about that. Maybe it wasn't your fault. Maybe fuck them. And you go, yeah, fuck them. Okay, so then what, on you go. That's good. Pave that area. Not going to fall in there anymore. Not dangerous mud.
Yeah.
So
it's all storytelling, right? Like that's all we kind of are as creatures. We tell stories to ourselves, to others, reflect on what's happened.
Interesting, eh? Very, very interesting. I wonder if these glasses are actually what I should be wearing. I bought them in a petrol station. You get to an age where you need reading glasses.
Yeah.
This happens to everybody. And so you go along to a person who looks at your eyes and says, yes, it's very interesting. Here's a prescription for these glasses. And basically what he's saying to you is, you're in your 50s, aren't you? Yes, go and get some glasses that magnify things very slightly so you can read properly, because your long sight's good. It's just that the elasticity in your eye muscles is getting a bit older and you can't do this zooming stuff quite so much in close.
Yeah.
And so you go along with a prescription and a self-important attitude to a bloke who sells glasses frames, and you pay $300 for a pair of glasses with little magnifiers in them, and then you realise about 6 months later that you can buy them in a gas station. So you buy one for the car, one for the house, one for the office, and a spare for $10 for the lot or something.
This next bit is the final section recorded in John's office, and it's about how much he enjoyed the simple act of writing in order to better understand the world around him.
Do you have all your scripts ever on file?
Yeah.
When did you start writing on computer?
Oh, that's a good question.
Because I noticed you've got lots of scripts and folders.
Yeah, I've got a lot of them.
That would be in typewriter action, right?
No, handwritten. I used to handwrite. I went from handwriting to this.
Yeah.
I think one of the reasons that I like writing is that I liked handwriting. It's like walking. It feels good. I like it.
You don't have a neat hand. Mine's terrible. Look at that.
No, that's right. My handwriting was.
This is running writing. It's nice.
Yeah, it used to be. That's one hand with the phone up here, but my handwriting used to be halfway decent, and It's but even if my handwriting's no good, I physically liked the fact that you could set down an idea. I still like this about writing in a different form. You'd identify with it. I physically like writing an idea I've had and writing an idea I haven't had, which emerges because you're writing.
Right.
They're both good.
Yeah.
Do you think?
For sure. It's creating something from nothing.
Yes. They're both very satisfying.
Mm.
But the business of making the actual words is I've always somehow liked that even when What am I doing? I'm sending that to it.
This next excerpt was recorded in a dressing room in ABC's South Bank studio after John and Bryan Dawe had finished filming several takes of both scripts. This was the same room where I had the privilege of watching the pair of them rehearse their lines. Both of their eyes were on the pages as they got their minds and their mouths around the words for the first time. They didn't laugh, but you couldn't have beaten the grin from my face. After watching these two men performing in character on television throughout my whole life, it was an incredible thrill to see it taking place right in front of me. Two masters at work. This excerpt begins with an anecdote that John asked me to leave out of my article, which I did, but I'm sharing it with you as I think the lesson about how writers can go about developing their capacity to perform at a high level is too good to be left unheard.
I don't put this in your article, but I remember years ago in 1970, and I'll tell you why not to put it in later. 1972, when I was living in England, when I was young and not knowing quite what I was going to do, knowing what interested me, but not yet understanding how I was going to embark upon the project. I was in the first Barry Mackenzie picture as an extra, basically, and they were very nice to me, and I'll never forget it because it's pretty important, really. But Barry Humphries and Bruce Beresford and the others, Barry Crocker and other people were very nice. I remember one time we were at a piss-up, basically, after we finished shooting, and there was a guy there who was a young fella. He's in his 30s and I was in my young 20s. And I said, "What do you do?" And because he was very entertaining and amusing and confident, he said, "Oh, I'm a writer." I said, "What do you write?" And he said, "Oh, film reviews and book reviews." I said, "Oh, yeah, who do you write them for?" He said, "Oh, The Observer and Sunday Times." And I said, "Oh, do you? Would I have read any of them?" "No," he said, "no, they've never run any of them." And I said, "Really? Why do you write them if they have never run any of them?" And he said, "Because one day their book reviewer or their film reviewer is going to get the flu, and the editor's going to know that he's got 2 excellent book reviews and 2 superbly written film reviews in his intro. He's going to know I can fucking do that every single week."
Okay.
And they're going to blink. And I said, "Really? That's interesting." And it was Clive James.
Oh, wow.
And he did have this capacity, but he couldn't break through. So what he was trying to do was demonstrate the capacity regardless, because the capacity was going to be of use to the system that he wanted to break into. And he was right about that. It was extremely well observed. Anyway, he later denied that when he was young he'd done this, which is the reason not to put it in the story. But I remember him, even if he wasn't doing it, I was impressed with it as an idea, because what it was doing, and it's in contrast to a couple of friends of mine who I would have thought when we were that age, that guy and that guy have got the capacity to become writers. And one of the reasons that one close friend of mine at university did become a writer in his field, which was music and film, and he's very good. The other one didn't. And the reason that he didn't become a writer was he didn't write anything. And Clive was writing before he was employed as a writer.
Right.
And he was reading the stuff that he was reviewing, and films, and he was concentrating, and he was reading everyone who was written in this field.
Giving yourself deadlines.
He was.
Yep.
So all of this training I thought, shit, that's a smart guy. That's really smart, because in a lot of these areas, and mine isn't terribly different from all of that, you do need to deal with a lot of these same things, and you mustn't be hugely spooked by them. You can be shit scared of an aspect of it, but you must believe that somehow you can do it. And you must also believe that not everything you do is going to be brilliant. So you're going to fuck it up, and you're going to need a bit of help, and you're going to be grateful for the wisdom of that person or the eye of that person, and that way you're going to learn. Because if you don't keep learning, you're not going to be very engaged in it, and you'll want to give it away.
Yeah. Well, you're just doing it for a quid. Build a show in the work, like we discussed earlier. Like the difference between being proud of something you're right versus dismissing it. I just did it for a job,
That's right.
Pays the bills.
Yes.
I met this bloke yesterday. I'm staying with my cousin in Brunswick, as I said. I met his housemate. And I said, "Oh, what do you do?" I asked him what he did, and he said, "I'm a project manager at a construction site." And I asked him if he enjoyed it, and he said, "Pays the bills."
Yes.
And that's right. It's like, it just tells me so much about that person straight away. It's like, you're not passionate about what you do, you're just doing it because. I couldn't imagine living like that.
Yeah, well, you know anything about Samuel Beckett?
Name sounds familiar.
The playwright, Irish playwright, who wrote Waiting for Godot and a whole lot of things in the 40s and 50s mainly, and sort of redesigned what modern theatre was capable of doing. And he's very distinctive, and a lot of it's about meaning and stuff. And he said that there was a point in his life when he realised, when he was trying to be a writer, and he said, I was a wanker who was trying to be a writer. And then there's a moment in his life where he had a kind of realisation about exactly what he wanted to do and how he wanted to do it, what his style was, or the idea that we now call the Beckett idea or something like that, something distinctively is. And he said, I remember when that happened, and he said, if you don't like my writing before that, that's neither here nor there. If you don't like my writing after that, you don't like my writing. Because after that, I did know what I was about. And that doesn't mean I think everything I did after that was fabulous, but that is what I was trying to do. Vaguely, that's my project over there. This stuff here was the heats. I had to get through the heats. But that stuff over there, and he described what the realisation was, and it was a definitely recognisable idea that he had. And I think you need to kind of go through. And they sound mutually exclusive, because you do need to be confident, and you need to be confident to do your work, but you don't want to be arrogant.
It's a fine line.
Yeah, it is. And you need to be sensitive to what wise people, not fools, but smarties, are saying to you, and you need to be a good judge of what it is that you like about the things you like, because you don't want to go along and think, I like, Monty Python or something, therefore I'll try and write like Monty Python, because you've got to acknowledge, if you're looking at Monty Python, that there are a whole lot of things at work in Monty Python, in any group at all, but in Monty Python, that maybe you don't have any access to. A lot of British stuff is about class, for example, and social embarrassment. Fawlty Towers is all about social embarrassment. I couldn't be less interested. I don't come from a society where I feel I should have social embarrassment. If I vomit on your floor, I should be apologetic and clean it up. I shouldn't feel suicidal, etc. So, and here are these people who are brought up saying if they think of vomiting on your floor, they'll kill themselves because you're rich and they're poor. Or you're Lord so-and-so and they're the gamekeeper's son or something. So, fuck that. You don't grow up in New Zealand without thinking that's a lot of shit. That's one of the benefits of living in the new world. So you've got to, I think, look at the things. The Goon Show, for example, which is, the Goon Show?
Couldn't picture it in my
head. Yeah, well, it's a radio show that was done in the 50s. largely written by Spike Milligan, starred Spike and Peter Sellers and Harry Seacombe. It's brilliant. And I grew up listening to that. Everybody at my age in comedy would have grown up listening to that. Sean would have, everybody would have. And it's basically it's essentially comes out of the Second World War. So in the history of comedy, the Second World War is the context you need to understand in order to understand who these characters are and why the world is completely upside down and why nothing makes any sense and why everything is mockable. Why it's possible in the Goon Show, for example, for somebody to say, you're going to be knighted. The Queen is going to give you a knighthood on Saturday, and for the other guy to say, why, what have I done? I've led a perfectly decent, everything is upside down. How did we win the war? The world is insane. Spike is a surrealist, so there's reality, but then there's this thing on top of it. So, but if you didn't know about this, you didn't know about their experiences in the Second World War, you need to read Milligan's war history in order to understand where the Goon Show comes from. So you can imitate what you think is the style, but you won't get it right. Because the part of the iceberg you can't see is the psychological and philosophical reasons that these things developed at all. So you both need to, need to look at other people's stuff, in your case, in writing, and go, oh, I really like that. And how do I, not so much how do I do that, but how do I have the effect on other people that has on me.
Absolutely.
That's what I was trying to explain earlier. It's a hard idea to explain, and I don't want to be pompous, and it's not unique. Everybody in this business is thinking a version of what you're thinking and what I'm thinking. And we also have different responses to things. I often think that if we look at one of the things that's never said about the arts is that if you and I look at a painting, this again is a pretty obvious thing to say, but I'll say it anyway. If we look at a painting, you and I, we might both say, oh, I like that. But we won't be having the same experience because the painting will be resonating against your memory in your case and my memory in my case. We're not even sure we see the same colours. You are unique in the experience of looking at that. And when we say yes, we both like it, or yes, we don't, or whatever it is, it doesn't mean our experience is the same. And because our experience is different, and because whatever image it is or whatever experience we're having is resonating against a different set of memories and experiences in each of these cases, my feeling sometimes is that the reason that we like the arts is not that the creative people are brilliantly creative, but that what they do makes us brilliantly creative. Because the act of experiencing it is a creative act. You're going to it. You're going, or whatever it is, which is a thing only you can do in your case. You can't imitate someone else. You can pretend that you're having that experience, but you can't fabricate the experience. So the business of appreciating it, which is one I've always valued since I was a kid, that's what I mean about being in the audience, is that to a degree you're collaborating with the things you like in a particular way in every single case, which is a bit of a will-o'-the-wisp of an idea, but it's, I think people do, and they'll have completely different ways of expressing that. But people will go away saying, I really like that art. And that's because they've had a creative... And when you go to an art exhibition or a film or something and it bores you shitless, it's because you're not having that experience. You're being deprived of a creative experience which you might otherwise have had. And which you could have by...
tuning into something that speaks to you.
Or even talking to some friend or other.
After the dressing room, we visited an editing suite where John viewed rough cuts with his producers before sticking around to advise on final cuts before the program was ready for broadcast. The other voice you hear belongs to editor Kayla Lampard, and this short anecdote came out of the pair of them reflecting on the development of her daughter and John's granddaughter, who are the same age.
My mother said that the first day I went to school, she saw me on the lawn after I came home from school, and I brought some other kids home with me, and I was 5, and she said, and I'd gone to school as this lovely little soft boy that my mother adored, and she said to me, "Hello John, what are you doing?" And I said, "I'm riding me bike, can't you see, you dumb cluck?" And she said, "My heart disappeared into the ground. You'd become this bloody monster. You were showing off to all these other, you'd become a completely differently socialised person in a day."
Oh, heartbreaking.
End of innocence.
Yeah, absolutely end of innocence. And of course,
Did she chase him? Did you have to ride fast after that?
No, I mean I was probably too insensitive to even notice the fact that I'd done that to her. But it didn't alter my fundamental relationship with my mother. It might have altered my behaviour towards my mother. But one of the things she needed to understand was that, I'd gone into a different group, and it was kind of inevitable and horrible for her.
The final scene in this episode is the longest, and it was recorded in John's car as he drove me from ABC's studio in Southbank to where I was staying in Brunswick. We talk about the structure of his work weeks, the Clarke Dawe DVD that was soon to be released at the time, as well as how he managed his career as a freelance writer and performer to ensure that he had several streams of income at any one time. The conversation continued for quite a while after he pulled over near the house where I was staying. More than anything else you've heard up until this point, I think this particular conversation is a perfect example of how deeply John thought and cared about writing, as well as how much he remained curious about everything and everyone around him.
So, outside of today, which is a full day for you of writing, performing, all that stuff, how do the rest of your work weeks look? Is there a way to find that?
Well, the rest
recently?
of it doesn't have... there's not a routine to the rest of it. Today's the routine day. I have various other projects which change all the time and have different requirements of me. Sometimes they involve, I'm in them as a writer or a producer, or I'm performing or something, and sometimes I'm just a script editor, or so a huge number of different permutations. So that varies a little bit, and it's November, so at this stage of the year there's quite a bit of scrambling going on to get a few things finished. A couple of writing jobs that need finishing, and a couple of productions that need to be wrapped up, not of mine but of other people's, but I'm involved in them.
And outside of this particular interview, are you doing any promo for the DVD?
I don't know about that. I mean, there'll be the ABC's a bit, they've got a sort of strangely ambivalent attitude to promotion. They want promotion, but they won't guarantee you that you'll get promotion on ABC television even. So you need to go, if we're not going to get any help from you, how's it going to, you've got the audience sitting there, you're doing the DVD, have you understood anything so far?
Yeah.
But they're sort of, I don't know, they've got strange, they're slightly spooked now and again by accusations that they really are a commercial organisation, and why should they be funded? I mean, these are in their own time. So you're often dealing with whatever those psychology, elements of their psychology are. So I never know quite what. But they'll jack up. I'll have to go and sit in a TARDIS, as you did when your book came out, and talk to, a skein of people who I suppose, and perhaps Bryan will. I don't know. I never quite know that. But a lot of our, I don't know exactly because I don't have audience research at my fingertips, but my instinct is that a DVD of ours would be a gift product around Christmas time, and in the retail outlets it vaguely ought to sell itself to a degree. It's got a picture of us on the front, and people know what they're getting. They should do that. One of the reasons the digital download stuff interests me is that it's a different sort of retail environment. And retail's interesting to me because I've always had to make part of my income out of retail. I can't make a living out of doing... when I was first doing television, I think I got paid $30 an appearance on New Zealand television, and $30 wasn't much even then.
And what program was that?
Oh, this is on on New Zealand television in the early 70s. So I would be asked to do something in some program, and I'd go and do 2 minutes or something, and I'd do it as a monologue, as Fred Dawe or something. And you got paid $30. And eventually they probably doubled that eventually when it started to work, but it still wasn't a wage. So I realised pretty early on that there's a large dislocation between impact and income. So I have always been aware of the usefulness of having some product in the market, because otherwise I don't think I can always make a living. And there's certainly no income between late November and February. Unless you're a shop centre in this business, because no one's going to pay you.
But do you get residuals or royalties or licensing? I do.
If somebody's licensing something, I'll get a fee, and I get royalties from a CD or a DVD or something. Yes, but we make more off an online shop than you do off royalties. If you were in my business, you're going to make more money out of buying your book and selling your book
because you buy it at cost
out of
price.
The author's royalty.
I see that.
So I've always tried to put into any contract my capacity to buy at the wholesale rate the product. So I can sell it, which also puts us in direct contact with our audience. So then if you've got a new product, you can just ping out a message, and that first rush of sales will often underwrite the production of the thing. So
who manages that aspect? Like, you've got those shelves at your office that are stacked with a new product. Who manages the mailing out? Is that your assistant? What's his name?
Stu. Stu does that. And I've always understood that aspect of... it's always interested me too, because it's a direct relationship with an audience. My father was in retail. I've always understood that retail would be... I can sort of... The mechanisms of retail are those of understanding, to some degree, social factors. Like, first record I ever released, for example, which was in New Zealand in 1975, which was a Fred Dawe record. You're far too young to understand these things. But
I've seen some on YouTube recently. That was the first I'd seen Fred Dawe.
Fred Dawe was
very funny.
He was a character I did initially on stage, but ultimately on television, and sort of starting in 70.
Down the Icon.
Crank that up. Do what you like, man. might not work.
No, it's working.
Hold this
Feel it.
down.
Feel it. So your first record?
First record.
Like an LP? Vinyl.
Yeah, an LP.
Yep.
And they said, righto, here you go, and there's a contract. And the cost of a record at that time was $9.99.
New Zealand.
Yeah. And I said I'd like to sell it. I'd like it to sell for not $9.99. I'd like to sell it for $4.99.
Huh.
And they said, no, that'll make it look cheap. People will put it in the basement, the
Deception.
chuck out bin.
Yeah.
And I said, no. I insist that you charge $4.99. And they said, well, no, you're just going to kill the market.
So they didn't believe you? Or they wouldn't?
No, they didn't. They thought, well, New Zealand records didn't sell terribly well. And I said, how many records are you
Printing.
expecting to sell?
Mm-hmm.
And they said, oh, we don't know. And I said, well, you must have some idea. And they said, no, we honestly don't. You never know when you release a record. And I said, well, put it this way. You gave me a morning in the studio to record the whole album. You must have some idea of how many copies you think it will sell. Because you will have a cost attached to that morning. And they said, well, John, if you sell 3,000 copies of a record in New Zealand, you're going pretty well. And if you sell 5,000, it'll be the biggest selling record released in New Zealand in 5 years. And my agent said, there was a guy I'd been at university with, said, well, in that case you won't mind putting the royalty up after 20,000 copies. And they said, oh, I'm not going to sell 20,000 copies. And he said, no, so you say. So you won't mind putting the royalty up after 20,000.
That's pretty clever.
I said, no, we won't. We won't have any difficulty doing that. And he said, but you won't mind putting it up again after 30, and after 40, and after 50, and after 60.
Gee.
And they said, no, we won't have any difficulty doing that, because of course they were then trapped in their own modelling.
Yes.
And I said, well, my contribution to this discussion was to say, well, it's not going to happen if it doesn't sell for $4.95. And they said, you must be insane. Why do you want to do that? And I said, because Fred Dawe gets thousands of letters a week. All of them are from kids.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because there were kids, secondary school kids loved Fred Dawe, primary school kids loved Fred Dawe, and older people didn't write letters to you terribly much, but there was a big. And I said, I don't want anybody being overcharged for a record that took me a morning to record. And if kids are going to make a discretionary decision, I want them to have the money to do it. And the kid can buy a Fred Dawe record out of his pocket money. I used to be that kid. I know that. So when the record came out, it was released at $4.99. And it was released on the 17th of November of 1975. And by Christmas Eve, it had sold 87,000 copies.
How many?
87,000. It was the biggest selling record in New Zealand history.
Wow.
Biggest selling New Zealand record.
Yes.
So, and I thought, oh, that's comforting, because what we said was true. Our instinct was right. And we knew more about. And they said, you don't know anything about the record market. And I said, you don't know anything about the Fred Dawe market. And I didn't know a hell of a lot about the record market. They were right, but it didn't disenfranchise me from having a view about what I was doing and who was responding to it. And in fact, a lot of the time in my subsequent years, my market has been about my age. So when I was doing Fred Dagg on Australian radio and New Zealand television, and then New Zealand. You know, I wasn't a lot older than these kids. I was in the young 20s at the time. But, you know, now if we walk down this street, there'll be a whole lot of young people who won't recognise me because they don't look at the ABC very much.
Yes, absolutely.
But a whole lot of very few people of my age will not have seen me somewhere because I've been around for a long time and so have they.
Yes, yes.
You know, it's not a huge tribute, but it is.
Just hanging around long enough. Yeah.
It is. So there's an element of that. And I've done a few books and CDs and things over the years, and the majority of them have been like the Sporting Nation, where you get the DVD of the series, or you get a Clarke Dawe DVD or a book of the scripts or something like that. And I've only a few times done a product that didn't have any relationship with a primary use.
Yes.
It wasn't the secondary use of a primary other thing. And they were projects that I just fiddled with in the computer. I wrote a book of verse.
Tournament?
Which was... No, the tournaments and the modernist movement configured as a tennis tournament.
Yes.
Yeah. But there's a book of verse whose paper-thin claim is that all of the great poets of the world actually came from here. And I've discovered works by all of them. Largely because I grew up listening to things that were, you know, poets whose work I thought was terrific, but whose experience was that at Christmas it snows. For example, it doesn't snow in my Christmas. I can imagine my Christmas in their mode, but it doesn't have snow in it.
Yep.
It's got 30 plus in it, and you know, it's hot.
Yep.
And you're at a beach. So I tried to walk in their shoes or something. So I borrow their forms. Whoops, no gears at all there. And that didn't have that was just written as a book. But first of all, it was just written as me farting about in the computer. Then I sort of eventually worked out a bit of a structure to it.
So how many revenue streams do you have at a time, like right now, for example?
Well, say I've got a few books that my publisher has published, and every now and again I get an account for that, but it's not very much unless you've got a book coming out. Like your book, you'll get some money in year 5, but it'll be nothing, you know. But if you do another book, then your new book will give you a bit of an income, and it will possibly add to the nothing you're getting from the previous book.
Yes, yes.
So that's not something you can rely on as income.
No.
So I can't rely on that. I can't rely. If you're doing a CD or a DVD or something, the money really mostly comes in the first bit. Because you can't just go, oh, that's great, I've had that record. Like that record I did in 1975. I'm not going to get any income from that anymore. That's not still selling. That's needed to be refigured, put on different collections, reimagined, and different product generated and so on, which I can do, but you don't make a lot of money from that. And you get paid on some jobs, you get paid on that basis, like you get a percentage royalty or a licensing fee or something. In other jobs you get paid a fee. Other jobs you get paid, like on the games I get a fee as a producer and a fee as a performer and a fee as a writer.
Yes, yes.
Ross and I we just split all the money, the writing money in half.
Yep.
I just gave all the other key cast the same as we all got the same key cast money. But I do quite well out of that because I'm in 3 parts of the equation. If you do a film on someone else's project or something, you just get a fee. What other manifestations are there of income? I don't know. But Ellen and I are reasonably cheap to run too. We don't need. I've never. And we're also typical of our generation in that there's not a lot of superannuation in my line of work. Job security, sick pay and all that, they don't exist. We don't have entitlements.
So you have to put it aside yourself.
Well, our advantage is that we have a house. You know, so that's about all you can say for our financial position.
Is Ellen still a teacher?
No, she was teaching when we were younger, and
Yeah.
then she went back to university. She's an art historian.
Ah, art history.
So she was then teaching in the university various times, and she's now writing various things. Again, you don't earn a lot from that. You know. So, but we don't. You know, we don't need.
You do all right. You get
Well,
by.
we survive. Yeah, we get by, and also a day when we don't have any income, but we have a good idea. That's a good day because that might be some income. Another day, but it's terribly swings and roundabouts. I mean, if you wanted to do any financial planning, you wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. Because you can't do any financial planning. You don't know whether you're going to be working next year. We don't currently know whether we'll be. What happens next year? And it's mid-November. So there are huge unknowns.
What is the games not the games? The Clarke Dawe contract worth for you?
What's it worth?
Yeah.
Well, that is an arrangement that includes. That's an arrangement that covers a relationship with the ABC, and in that arrangement, the company provides what we do and some other things. So that doesn't include just that, but the money in commercial television, for example, is much bigger. And I've worked in commercial television. I'm not a completely, it's not as if I've got a burrow in the ABC somewhere. I've worked for pretty well everybody over the years.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that the total environment changes from time to time. When I worked at Channel 9, when I first worked at Channel 9, Kerry Packer owned it, then Alan Bond bought it, then Kerry Packer owned it again, and the financial environments in those three periods were completely different because when Packer first owned it, it was a dominant network and it paid quite well. You needed to provide a benefit to the station, but if the benefit was demonstrable, they paid you properly. Bond took it over and money went mad. You got paid ridiculous amounts of money. Then Packer took over and said, this has all got to stop. And why did he stop it? He just went, righto, etc. And they are pretty clear because they said to us, well, we were on a current affair. In those days, a current affair was a sort of serious program. They used to interview the Prime Minister and all that sort of stuff. And they said, well, here's the deal, John. If the ratings on the second quarter hour of the current affair on a Friday go up, you are hugely valuable to the network because the demographic which likes your stuff we can't get for a lot of the rest of the time. If it goes down, you're dead. It's all over.
Right.
So they were reasonably clear
Reasonably, yeah.
about it, and that's the way that is the way they work things out. That is a completely those criteria are completely commercial. At the ABC, the whole broadcasting notion is slightly different because they're sometimes providing a service that isn't commercial. For example, the ABC is the only genuinely national network in either radio or television. And that is because no one else can make money by broadcasting a weather report to the middle of Queensland because there are 4 people out there. But the ABC's remit is that it is a national network, and that's why the ABC is so valuable. It's because it is a lot of people's only source of a lot of stuff. This is one of its jobs. But it's not. No one's going to make a quid out of that. So the ABC's not going to, no one wants the ABC to shut down in those areas. A lot of people want the ABC to shut down in the area where they think they can make a quid out of the ABC's audience. But nobody's saying, oh no, stop providing that news service on radio to the middle of Queensland Because they're going, can you make money out of it? No, actually, no, you can keep doing that.
Yeah, it's fine.
That's fine.
I understand.
All that. So it is a slightly different environment, and the nature of the service is slightly different. And there's a bit more of a... it's partly because it's not commercial that sometimes if you release a book or a record or something, it's one of the only times when you get a genuine notion of where are you going, incidentally? I'm driving you up.
Blythe Street?
Oh yeah, do I?
Left onto the line.
I know where
it's
that is.
after...
It's up there, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a bit further. I mean, thank you for this.
No, that's alright. One of my kids lives back there. I'll just go and drop some stuff off when I get done. Yeah, so it's a different sort of relationship. But when we were doing the games, for example, we never missed a week, because that contact that we have with an audience every week is pretty delicious to us. It's nice. And it sort of would be much less enjoyable all round if it wasn't just there every week.
Yeah.
It needs to kind of be there every week.
Yeah.
So it's worth, sometimes when we were doing the games, we did Clarke Dawe at lunchtime in the game set.
Wow.
Because we just didn't have time to go down there.
Gee, that would have been fun to watch.
Yeah, we've done Clarke Dawe in all sorts of strange places because we've always wanted to do it, and we've always wanted to stay sort of there, and we like doing it, but we haven't always had time to, like, you didn't have a whole day to prepare it, for example, so cobbling it together. There's a fair bit of ad-libbing in some of those ones.
Yeah. So this DVD, what's the time span?
Well, we have, since we last released the DVD, which is around about the end of 2011 or something.
Okay. Is it going to be everything, or just like the highlights?
These days they're everything. We used to do a big sort of compilation where we put the best of, like we did one years ago where we did the best of the first sort of 15 years. You wouldn't want all of those because there were too many of them.
Full Catastrophe?
Yeah, that's right. But those were the ones which we selected largely on the basis of what people had said to us. Go on, my boy.
Did well.
So we made a selection, and we might have got a bit right and a bit wrong. Who knows?
Yeah.
But that largely because there were too many. Because we've been doing this for a long time, so there are.
How many episodes do you keep count? Do you have any
No,
idea?
I don't keep count. But you could calculate it. But
like
say
40 per year. Is that something like that?
well, 46,
40
something a year. But we do more than one a week very often. So what we record is very numerous. But we would have done, say 45 a year. For 10 years would be 450. For 20 years would be 900. For 25 years would be 1,400 or something. But then we've done oodles of them that haven't gone to air or have resurfaced in some other. But nobody wants 1,000 of those things. I don't.
Oh, come on, someone would.
Yeah, maybe. But there are these things called completists. These customers called completists. So these days, the advice is it's much better to do them more often, but do them complete.
Yeah.
Because otherwise people will go, where's that thing?
Yeah.
So that's what you have.
So when you're filming throughout the year, the 45 episodes or so, the money, just to focus on this again, the money that you get from that contract, is that the bulk of your revenue, your income for that time? Like, as opposed to the store and that sort of thing?
Opposed to what?
Like the store, like selling...
Oh, yeah, you don't make a fortune out of the store. Well, depends on... Yes, that would be a big... Yeah, that would be the main thing. Like this year I haven't done a film or anything, so my main income would have been from there. Some years you do, like in a year where you do the games, that wouldn't be the case. It depends a bit on what else you've got on, and the other thing is that if you have, I don't need, as long as I've got some money coming in from some reasonably regular source, I need to hear the tap tripping, I don't want to go, I've got $5 this week, I'll take my foot off the accelerator. But you do need to go, oh, I'm going to get $5 every week forever, whatever it is. Then you can do things that you're not getting paid for too. You can do things that... what street is that? That's Miller Street.
It's a bit further along.
Okay. Then you can do things like you can, young people write a script and they send it to you and stuff, and you can read it and you go and have a chat with them or a script editor or help them, or you can do a part in that thing there which has actually got no budget but you want to help them. So you can do that. It's a bit harder to do that if you're actually scrambling to get anything.
Yes. I mean, I know this myself.
Yeah, you would. These are all equations you would be familiar.
Yeah, I've had a good run generally, but funnily enough, in the last few months, the last month in particular, since my book came out, I've really struggled to get work. Like, I'm pitching same volume, same quality of story ideas, or so I thought, but just getting lots of no rejections.
Well, why is it? Do you think they're buying less? Because that's one thing that might be happening. It seems to me there's a huge contraction.
Well, there's the same amount of magazines each week and each month. Like, I'm pitching the same slots to fill.
Yeah.
All I can put it down to is the quality of my ideas. So you want to take a left at the lights here.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So it's been I've had a bit of a blow to the confidence in the last month in particular.
Oh, that's no good. Well, yes.
But, as you say, swings and roundabouts.
Well, it is, but that's not to say that if you get your arm into the...
You want to pull over here? That could be fine. I'll just walk further.
If you want to... But you can also be a bit proactive. I never know what to do. I mean, it's one of the reasons that... It's one of the reasons why being a writer, or engaged in writing in some way, I reckon is an interesting thing to do, because if somebody's not paying you to do it, you can still do it. And I did that when I was young, and I actually went back to New Zealand to start a magazine. And then I got involved in a whole lot of other things, and we did a version of the magazine. It was all good fun and things, but the other things took off better, and I drifted into that, and then I had to do a lot more follow-up, and then I realised I was onto something if I could get that to work over there, and then that would give us some choice. We could choose what to do, and we could, Helen would have a bit more choice. She could go back to do a bit more study and things she wanted to do, and I'd have a lot more choice, because I'm not interested in doing everything that I used to do. When I was younger, for example, I was on stage every night. Well, I'd rather be at home at night.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, if I get to the point where I can afford to do less of that and a bit more of that. So over time, you sort of mould what you're doing into a bit more of a notion of what you want to do, and that can change, so it needs to be mouldable. But I've just written a family history, for example. Nobody paid me to do that. And something in me wanted to do it, and I've always wanted to do it. And I learnt a hell of a lot, and I read a hell of a lot, and nobody would probably even be interested in it. Not even my cousins might be not interested. Who knows? But I'm glad I did it. I feel that I understand things a bit better about where everybody came from and what the hell was going on. And I dug up some interesting photographs I'd never seen before of people, and all sorts of good stories. And I read about aspects of what was going on in, Northern Ireland, Belfast and stuff in the 20s, and like when my father, when his mother, who was pregnant, left Ireland in 1914, and he was born in New Zealand at the end of 1914. Well, that period in Ulster was hugely a period of political and military action. I had no idea of any of this. So one of the things that they were dealing with was this, whatever anxiety is produced by having gone through all of that, and the First World War. The man went through the bloody... my father didn't meet his father until he was 6. because he was in the First World War.
Right.
He couldn't get out. He couldn't go there.
Yeah.
So he turned up when his kids were 6. Hello, I'm your father.
Did your father serve in the Second World War?
Yeah, he was in the Second World War.
Yeah.
But, I would always... But I'll quite often just get into the computer and I'm sure you do the same. And if writing genuinely engages you, you'll go in and you'll... Like I've got to the age now where I've started... I was just talking to someone about this the other day. I've started writing. There are a few people who I've met in my life who I've thought, you're a very interesting person, and I'm noticing, it's good for me to meet you, and why can't I should be able to synthesise that and write it. Why is that person so interesting or so impressive, or why is that life? Why has nobody written about that life? So I've tried to just open up the computer and have a bit of a crack at writing some of these things about people that I've run across. Not in to do with my work, but to do with them, really. One of these days that'll become something. I don't know what it is. Who the hell knows? But if I don't write it, I'll be like, there are people. And I'll be like the person who has the really good idea but never does it. And I think one of the uses of talk and writing is that you don't always write something because you know what you want to say. You sometimes know what you want to say because you start writing.
Yeah.
That's
what you're saying earlier, the act of filling the page, building something from nothing.
Yeah, that's right. Well, obviously in talk you sometimes say things you didn't even know you meant. And the subconscious is flying a bit of a kite, or I'm saying this, oh goodness, I hear this thing coming out of my face. You obviously do that when you're ad-libbing. All sorts of stuff jumps out of you and you think, shit, you hear it and you go, where's all this coming from? And it's bits of phrases, and there's this faintly kind of associative process going on that's joining all this up, and you hear people doing it all the time, and it's because it's the opposite of being careful and husbanding your ideas and making them run in their lane.
It's being open to spontaneity.
It's the opposite. It's the vomiting approach.
Yes. And
sorting it out later. Well, both of those are useful. So I sometimes, when I'm not being employed to do anything, I'll sit there and go, I might try and write something about so-and-so. And it won't be something that I'll do immediately. It'll be proceed at glacial pace and fiddling, and I'm learning a lot. And I read a few things like that. There are a few books that I keep going back to and reading. I think it's one of the things I like about a lot of them. There's a very good book, a favourite book of mine, by an American sports writer called Red Smith, who was writing in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s or something. Long dead now. But he wrote very beautifully. He wrote, I don't know much about it. I never read his writing in the paper. I only read collections of his writing after he died. And he wrote one book called To Absent Friends, which you can buy online from America, and it costs you $5 or something, but you can't buy it here. It's just it's a collection of pieces he wrote after some people died, so including some horses. So not the obituary piece. So somebody didn't die, and then, like, he wouldn't have published a thing this week about Gough Whitlam, but in 3 years or something, it'd be a piece about Gough Whitlam, and he'd started off by saying, "There's something about Gough Whitlam the other day," and off it would go. So it's not trying to get into on the coattails of what's actually happening. It's much more to do with his own ruminative processes.
Right, yeah.
And all of them are positive. He's written about some very bad people who did very bad things, but he doesn't say bad things about them, because that's not his purpose. He's trying to give them the best. Like there was one, for example, about I bought the book. I'd never heard of him. I bought this book because I opened it in a junk shop, and I saw a thing about a guy called Jim Farley, and Jim Farley ran the New York Athletics Association, and he said the New York Athletics Association was previously run by Bill Smith, and then Dave Simpson and Jim Farley got elected onto the committee, and Dave Simpson went to Bill Smith and said, Jim thinks that we should rotate the presidency for the three of us since we're all in the committee. And Bill Smith said, oh, okay, I know, so I'll be the president this year and then someone else next year. He said, yeah, that's what Jim thinks. And he said, oh, that's okay, let's do that. So he said the next year Jim Farley became president of the New York Athletic Association. And 5 years later, he was still the president. And Bill Smith said to Dave Simpson, or whatever his name was, I thought we were going to rotate the presidency. And Jim Simpson said, yeah, no, Jim says we've stopped rotating. And the story was called Big Jim Has Stopped Rotating, and it was but Jim was dead.
Okay. Okay.
And so the piece was about Jim's administration of the New York Athletics Association. He was obviously a bully. He was obviously had become the permanent ongoing president by means of chicanery through this intermediary.
Yeah.
But the guts of the story was about his passion for athletics and the fact that under his thing they'd built that big stadium, and so it said not everyone agreed with him,
Mm-hmm.
So he'd often indicate to you that this was an impossible prick to deal with, but he'd say, like but he'd always say there was a famous sports writer, horse rider called Grantland Rice, who was a friend of his, and he said Grantland was such a nice fellow. He said, I'll tell you how nice he was. We were leaving the offices of the New York Times one day, and we were crossing the sidewalk to get into a cab because we were going out to the Yonkers Raceway, where we'd been told who was going to win race one. We had a tip and we knew it would be good.
Mm-hmm.
It was extremely reliable. And we were in the car, and Grantland left the building, and he stepped out into the sidewalk, and a woman stopped him and began to talk to him. And he talked to the woman. And we were in the cab, there were four of us, we were in the cab, and we said to the cabbie, toot the fucking horn, get Grantland in the car, we have to go. The cabbie was tooting, we were waving. Grantland would look over every now and again, and in the end we were going to be really pressed to get to the fucking track and get the bet on. So we were increasingly anxious about this, and eventually Grantland dissociated himself from this conversation, got in the car, courteously detaching himself, and we took off at the speed of sound. And we said, what the fuck have you been doing? We're not going to fucking get it. He said, I'm terribly, terribly sorry. That woman knows my sister in Baltimore. And I turned to Grantland and I said, Grantland, you don't have a sister in Baltimore. And he said, I know that.
Wow.
But this woman, he was not going to say, get out of my way, I'm doing something else, you're a fucking intruding, because he was such a good fellow. So he had that conversation with that woman. He might even have explained, he might not have explained, but she
left happy.
She left happy.
Content.
That's Grantland Rice. Anyway, so I read this book, and I was reading about all these people. I knew none of them, and I'd never heard of him. You feel good after reading each piece in the book. Makes you feel good. And I thought, what a fantastic idea for a book. And then I read a bit more about him, and I didn't read his sports report stuff because that was all about stuff that I didn't see and have no interest in, a boxing match that occurred in 1953 and a horse race,
Yes.
But I was interested in these other things because they're all types, they're all readable as human stories. But he said an interesting thing that also impressed me, was that he said in an interview somebody did with him when he was an old man, they said, you just have a really great gift of storytelling, and it comes incredibly naturally, and you've just got it. Where did that come from? And he said, well, I've always wanted to write. It matters to me somehow to write. But he said, I couldn't always do that, and I've learned all my life. And he said, I attended the very first year that the New York University had a writing course. I was in the class. It was 1910. And I was in the first class, and whoever was interviewing him said, but they wouldn't have taught you anything at the university. And he said, oh no, he said, I remember being taught something on the first day. He said, we were asked to write something on the first day in that course, and we were sitting in a room, and we were given an hour to write it. And after 50 minutes, the teacher said, well, 50 minutes is up. I'm going to have to ask you to stop writing in 10 minutes. And I would remind you that while you can't write a lot in 10 minutes, if you're intelligent, you can cut a fair bit out. He said, I never forgot that. That's a great thing to learn. I wouldn't have occurred to me that
spend the last 10 minutes editing.
Yeah, it wouldn't have occurred to me that one of my functions as a writer ought to be a slight editing process, because I should be editing my stuff, not someone else.
Yes, right.
I should be making those decisions. I'm not auditioning this shit for someone else. This is what I fucking mean.
Yeah.
So he said that the first day, I thought, whatever else this course fails to teach me,
Right.
that is just a different way of looking at things. It's a realisation for me. So he said, you can always learn. And he said, if you think my writing looks natural, that makes me happy, but it's fucking hard work getting to that point. So don't imagine that he was saying, no, you're not just born like that. I'm 105. It's taken me 104 years to get to do that. So that was his point, and I think I've just written shitloads of stuff which no one else will ever see, and which I haven't even got anymore, but which is an early draft of something that you then get better and better at doing. I think a lot of people writing is possibly changing. I mean, maybe your generation's learning to write in 42 character lengths or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
But mine didn't.
Right.
And I think sometimes when I'm writing the sort of thing I'm talking to you, I don't worry about the length, because I don't have any length in mind at all. I have the story, and I have the impression I want to give you about that person. The effect I want to have on you is in my head, not the length of it, or even how I'm going to do it, or even the structure, or even where I'm going to start. And sometimes I'll show it to Helen, or I'll show it to one of my kids or something, and because they're normally the first person to see, the first people to see anything of mine, and they go, you don't think you need that bit there. Maybe you can start there. And I often look at that and think, I see in that first paragraph I say, I'm putting on my writing hat and my writing clothes.
Clearing your throat.
Clearing my throat. And,
Yes.
yeah, exactly.
Yes.
And with my quill, yay, and then forsooth I will now. And then you go, I was walking down the street and I start there.
Yes.
So
Yes.
you get a bit of that. And honestly, I get snowblind. I'm sometimes not. If you're a bit lucky with the people you know, then they're going to offer you criticism which is not designed to hurt you, and is honest and intelligent, and doesn't come from doing the same thing you do. They're not trying to do the thing the way you do it, but they are, obviously. If you can't have the effect you want to have on people who you have that sort of regard for, then you probably haven't got it. Do it again, John. Go and have another crack at it. There's a good boy. Well, no one's going to pay you to do that. But I've always been a fiddler like that. And I'm so stupid. My education wasn't entirely successful, and I don't know that I respond terribly well to structured learning. So I'm afraid I've always been at the mercy of the haphazardry of learning things myself by coming off my bike rather a lot.
Seems to have worked out for you.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I look at the stuff I did earlier, and I can, like early when I was in my 20s and things, and I can see. It's a bit like that thing you have when you find someone, your parents dig out an old school book of yours, and it's got your handwriting on it when you were 8. And you go, that's no one else's handwriting. That's my handwriting. It's not the handwriting of anyone else, and yet I'm not that me anymore. So you both are and aren't that person. And so the New Zealand way of telling that story is that this is Captain Cook's axe. It's had 6 new heads and 9 new handles, but that's his actual axe.
Okay.
So there's a continuum of idea there, which is not represented by the actual fact. So this artifact here, this is a metaphor for what isn't there.
Yes.
And so I look at this stuff, as you no doubt do, of stuff that you wrote when you were younger, and you go, I can see what I was doing, and I can see there's something there that's related to what I'm doing now. Other things that are not related to me and stuff. And when I did a lot of Fred Dagg in New Zealand, I didn't really have a script. I had a bit of an idea of what I was going to say. But I used to just, off I'd go, And if I forgot where I was going, or I just realised where I was going was no good, I'd shout at the dog or something. I'd just look off camera and tell the dog, sit down! Sit down, get back in the truck, or whatever it is. And then by the time I'd finished that, I'd come back and I'd have a bit of a fresh start. That way I didn't have to stop.
Yeah.
Because it's boring stopping, because, I'd rather go home.
Yes.
Get the job done. So I don't think there are, a lot of the pleasure you get is not in the professional part of it at all, in a sense. But how you make a living, that's which you're focusing on in those questions. That is an interesting question, and it's always been my main question. How do I make a living? Because if you wanted to make a living as an entertainer, the money's not in what... the money's in live performances and advertising and where the money is. Money's not over here where I'm farting around in the sandpit with my friends.
Right.
Playing pretend. It's not there at all. What I have to do is, how do you make... That's what I mean about my understanding of retail has always been not so much that I derive a lot of income from it, but I take some comfort from the fact that I can't afford to have only this one here.
Yeah.
Because every now and again it either stops or it isn't enough, and I need this help over time. Amortised over 10 years, I do need this. Maybe not each year, but amortised, that's an important part of the mix, and it has to happen. So I've got to generate that in order to have the choices that I want to exercise, because I don't want to do some other things. I have done almost everything. I've given everything a look, but I didn't enjoy every aspect of it, and the things that I've ended up doing, I really do rather like. I'm lucky, but you do have to buy the right to do that, or otherwise you'll end up being, writing something that you don't have any regard for somebody you don't much care for. I've done that. I'm not very nice under those circumstances, and I'm not very happy. And really, I'd rather do my thing badly than someone else's thing well, because I'm going to learn here, and I don't mind working with and for other people. I love it. Collaborating is a joy. But the other thing is, I don't think there are too many rules, different strokes for different folks. But for me, I need to. I've done a whole lot lot of things in my time, and some of them I really didn't much enjoy. Nothing there for me. So why go and do that again? I'd rather go over there. And also, if you're still writing, as you getting older is an interesting process, because you don't want to do what you used to do. I don't want to do what I used to do when I was doing stuff on the telly when I was in my 20s. I couldn't do what I do now without having done that, but I don't want to keep doing it. You need to develop. You change your mind. You change your, as Seamus Heaney says, with any, the nucleus stays the same, but with any luck, the circumference moves out. It's a good way of putting it, because you can see in that 8-year-old's handwriting, you can see, I recognise that boy. But you obviously aren't that boy, because you're not a boy.
You came from that, yeah.
And the circumference has moved out. You're informed by a whole lot of other things. Anyway, I'm very boring about that, because it's always interested me.
Not at all.
It interests me in a lot of writers that I've looked at over time too. And you'd need to make a living at least in order to be still engaged in that process. And how you do that is a central question. You are quite right, I don't know the answer.
If you find out, let me know.
Yeah, I don't know the answer at all. It'd be nice if there was one.
It's been great spending the day with you.
Oh, well, thank you.
Great to get to know you a little bit.
Oh, well, thank you, and I hope you make something of it. Sorry, it was
I'll do my best.
just, not as exciting as going to the pictures with your auntie, but there you go.
No.
Good luck. Well, ring me if you need anything else, and let me know what the photo guy took too.
Will do.
Because he seemed like a smarty, but it'd be nice to know what he took, even if the ones they don't want
Very
might
close.
be halfway interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks,
Well,
John.
go well. Good
You
luck.
too. See ya.
See you later.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Penmanship, and thank you to my guest, John Clarke. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope it provided an insight into how that brilliant man saw the world. I miss him. My condolences to John's family. You can find show notes to this episode and all previous episodes at penmanshippodcast.com. If you have feedback, I'd love to hear from you. Email is andrew@penmanshippodcast.com. You can also find the show on Facebook and on Twitter @penmanshipau. If you enjoy this podcast, there are several ways you can support it. You can share it with people in your life who love reading and talking about great Australian writing, or you can leave a review on iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you happen to be listening to this podcast. The theme song is Eternally Yours by Laughing Clowns. That's it for now. Until next time.